another episode of Nigeria Today. I am Charles Ibe. A very lovely welcome to the platform where we talk about Nigeria. What is happening in Nigeria, in the political scene, in the economic scene, and in the corporate existence of this entity that we know as Nigeria. And on this episode today, we will be talking about the fight against corruption by the Muhammadu Buhari-led administration. Yes, it started in 2015 when he won the presidential elections, defeated an incumbent against all odds, and he did promise then that fight against corruption was going to be the focal point of his administration. 4 years down the line, how did it go? Did it do well? Did it not do well? Are Nigerians better off in the fight against corruption? Well, Nigerians have given him another 4 years in the saddle, and yes, he did say fight against corruption continues. And today we will be x-raying this fight against corruption, doing an impact assessment on this impact of this fight against corruption on Nigerians, on the economy, and on our corporate entity, Nigeria. And I have with me an extraordinary guest who will be joining me to do justice to this discussion today. His name is Adesina Byron. He is a lawyer, and he is also a former presidential candidate on the Kowa party platform. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to
discuss
Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Now, the fight against corruption. What is your assessment of the drive so far?
Well, you know, the fight against corruption is everybody's fight. Government has a role, the public have a role, corruption agencies, anti-corruption agencies have a role, and it is a fight that is not waged in a day, nor won in a day. Before corruption can become as endemic as it appears to be in Nigeria, it took some time. It took years of reduced or diminished accountability between the government and the people. It took some years of impunity, especially during the military era. So the culture of not being accountable and also operating with impunity sort of grew on Nigerians. It grew into the fabric of both Nigerian governments. But you see, to everything there are two sides.
Yeah.
There is what you call the supply side and the demand side. When we expect a corrupt-free society, we expect that government and state actors should fight corruption deliberately by the systems we put in place, checks and balances we put in place. But we also expect that the public should be abhorrent of corruption. So the public continues to create the environment whereby instead of hailing corrupt people and hailing corruption, they should be looked as pariahs by the public. No matter what government is doing, if the public continues to welcome corrupt practices and welcome corrupt individuals, either in their local government or states, then the battle, you know,
is more or less lost before it even started.
Virtually lost. So if you look at this particular government came on the mantra that it will fight corruption, and indeed other governments had been putting things in place to fight corruption. What is corruption anyway? It's the misapplication of state resources, the misuse of state power, the misuse of opportunities, which creates an uneven economic level, an uneven framework,
an uneven distribution of
the common good. Distribution of the common good. What engineers corruption at times? If, for example, we create systems in which that people find difficult to adapt to, that are so difficult, people will always look for corners to cut. So there is a whole raft of things that can enable corruption.
So in a nutshell,
yes,
the corruption doesn't just spring up.
It doesn't just spring up, and nobody is corrupt.
You did say it's a reactional behavior?
It is both reaction to opportunity, reaction to
opportunity lost or opportunity not
when I mean
harnessed.
opportunity, they say a thief will only thief where there is an opportunity to steal. If the sanctions are not there, if you know if you steal you cannot get caught, there will be a tendency to steal. So is the same with corruption. If you believe that you won't get caught and you will not be punished if you are corrupt, or you believe that once you corrupt and you steal enough money, right, you can always negotiate your way to freedom. Then what is this then? So you need systems that themselves do not make corruption easy. That is, your public financial management systems must be tight. Your public procurement systems must be tight. And then you also need agencies that will deliberately go after or prevent corruption practices.
All right, like when you started, you did mention about the people.
Yes.
Abhorring corruption acts and corrupt practices. Now, but we find out in Nigeria, and we have a peculiar situation where it appears people get rich, just get rich, no matter however it comes. And then people take common goods, people take common wealth, and then you see that they are celebrated by the ordinary man on the street because of whatever the society have really placed on the premium on wealth. Now, looking at the fight against corruption from this premise, would you say it was actually what Nigerians needed at the time it came?
Nigerians will never need corruption. Corruption will not do well for Nigerians in any way, shape or form. It may serve some individuals, but it can never serve Nigeria well as a collective.
As a collective entity.
So the people that perpetrate corruption in Nigeria, they have seen that over time, it is either the only way to behave or the easiest way to behave, or despite the fact that it may not be easy, but you know that if you behave so, it's the most rewarding way to behave. So the point is this: why do people celebrate some people who are corrupt? Take for example, some people believe that the wealth of this nation is unevenly distributed. That is, where the wealth is being made is different from where
it's being shared.
And so some people, to their mind, they justify being corrupt by claiming that, well, in the first place, this wealth is not being shared well, so they want to redistribute it, right? You know, that is a warped argument, because at the end of the day, you cannot solve a wrong with another wrong.
Exactly.
And this is what we are saying.
All right.
So this government, for example, previous governments, they set up EFCC, ICPC, Code of Conduct Bureau. That is a previous government, and it has done, that is enforcement agencies.
Yes.
Another government came out, they set up single treasury account, and all these things are strengthening the public financial management. Another regime comes in to implement BVN, right? What we have not seen is the pursuit of corruption cases, especially high-level cases, high-profile cases, in a manner that will create a disincentive to people who may want to
engage in corrupt practices.
You cannot fight corruption satisfactorily if you don't have what I call blind political will. That is, pursuing corruption no matter whose ox is God. When we apply, you see, you cannot fight intransparency with intransparency. You cannot fight corruption other than by being, one, accountable. You must be ready to answer questions when you are asked, especially when you are a public figure. Transparency. You should be able to do things in the open.
That everybody will.
Right? Fairness. That is, what rules for Mr. A must apply to Mr. B. Otherwise, the public will see the entire framework as designed to benefit Mr. A instead of benefiting Mr. B. So it is a collection of attitudes, skills by anti-corruption agencies and justice service agencies, and as well as attitude you know, and knowledge, you know, knowing exactly what the situation is concerning corruption.
Now, let's look specifically at this fight as we have it right now by this present administration, which just transferred from the previous administration. Before now, Nigerians have stated at various fora that the administrations have set up some of the anti-corruption institutions we have. Fine, they did set up those institutions with lofty ideals, but lacked the political will to drive it to logical conclusions in terms of convictions, in terms of placing deterrence against corrupt acts. Now, but the fight as we have it now, we have also had complaints that perhaps the implementation of the strategies of the anti-corruption drive makes it appears to be targeted at a specific group of people, at a specific political party, as select individuals. What is your take to that?
Well, you know, the first thing I'll say is that anti-corruption is a policy. And a policy is either only as good or bad as its implementation. But I don't want to rule over the success or failure of any policy, except I have reviewed it. And how do you review a policy? You look at the governance structure of that policy itself, how decisions are made to implement the policy. The second thing, you look at what is being communicated, the communications around that policy, by way of messaging to the people and receiving messages from the people. Then the issue of coordination. You want to make sure that if a policy is to be implemented, all the stakeholders and parties to the implementation are coordinated. Is the EFCC coordinated with the ICPC? Is it coordinated with the NFIU? Is it coordinated with COMEL? Is it coordinated with the Attorney General's office?
Another
are we coordinating with Code of Conduct Bureau?
Bureau?
And what does coordination mean? Do they exchange information as they should in a seamless manner? And do they collectively together ensure that prosecution is successful? That is one thing. And the last one is monitoring and evaluation. If you have a policy in place, at least periodically, maybe once a year or once every 2 years, you come back and review it objectively. Now, the issue Nigeria has with reviewing policies is that the policy is usually reviewed by the person who wrote the policy and implementing it. So how does a man who implements a policy pass or fail himself?
Exactly.
So you have to have independent review of the policy.
Really?
The feedback we're having now is that that policy is being reviewed either by people within government or people who are in opposition. And nobody has sat down to evaluate its review. Of course, there are examples of people, there are allegations of people who still have corrupt cases and who find themselves in government, right? The jury is not out of that. It's left for people to wait and see what government is going to do about those allegations. You know, so, but it will be better for the government to take such allegations and accusations seriously and not personally, so that they can correct it and demonstrate to people that this anti-corruption regime can work and is being deliberately made to work.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I want to also talk about strategy, still on strategy of fighting corruption. We have seen cases where some are seemingly or allegedly corrupt persons, high profile or not, are picked up on a hunch. They just on an information and all of that, and they are picked up and taken out of circulation and taken into detention before actually being investigated. Now, what should it be? Should it be an investigation first before an arrest, or should it be arrest then go and investigate? And at the end of the day, what do we get out of it?
Well, at times once there is what you call in law a prima facie case, once a complaint has kicked in, at times you don't want the accused or the perpetrator to destroy the evidence, and you believe at times when he is free, he may tamper with that evidence. But the laws also provide how you can secure such evidence and also secure that the perpetrator does not tamper with the evidence. It is about how we apply ourselves to the laws. So, investigation can be quiet until all the evidence is brought to bear, and then you set him up for prosecution. right?
Yes.
And at the same time, investigation can be ongoing. If you establish a case already that something has happened, but to establish to what extent it has happened, you may continue that investigatory process to ensure that you get it right. But investigations shouldn't be never ending. It must conclude at a time. And that's why people, those who are fighting corruption should take particular cognizance to the Administration of Justice or Criminal Justice Act, which tells us when and how the criminal procedures, for how long should we investigate. There are some people who have just been in jail, throw them in jail without sentencing. I'm not sure that is good for the system, because the justice sector itself is an institution.
Yes.
And if you don't apply it well, you are weakening that institution. You may claim now that you are using it to stop a perpetrator, but once you start meddling with the institution and being over flexible with how it is used, someone with a bad mind tomorrow will come and use it against an innocent person. So I think we have rules, we have conditions. I think the investigative agencies should be, their capacity should be built.
Okay.
I think then there should be a link between detection, between investigation, prosecution, and adjudication. And that link, they say, the weakest part of the chain is the weakest link.
Yeah.
So once we strengthen the entire cycle, then we can. Yeah.
Now talk about the duration of investigation, the duration of litigation, and all of that. Should there not be a time limit, a time frame when somebody has to go through these processes to ensure that actually justice delayed is not justice denied?
Okay. There's a time limit to how much you can detain someone.
Yes.
There's a time limit within when a case should ideally be determined.
Yes.
But we know what the justice sector in Nigeria is. Many cases drag on. When a case starts, there must be a time limit that a case must start. But you know what happens? The case, due to interlocutory and interim matters, they extend the duration of that case. And for me, this is where your first point about concluding investigation thoroughly before venturing to prosecute, is necessary. I think that some of what we experience in that regard is because of weak investigation, weak detection capacity. You only know this man is a thief. The evidence that you have to claim he's a thief, you don't have. If you say somebody stole $1 billion and you put it in paper and you charge him to court for stealing $1 billion, and what he stole was 5 billion, your case is weak. Your case will not
fly.
And we run a justice system whereby it is the man who is prosecuting, the man who is claiming that should prove. You cannot ask me to come and prove my innocence in court. You have to prove my own guilt
before you now come to defend yourself.
That is where they have a problem.
All right. Okay, now so let's look at because the fight has to be holistic.
Yes.
Then this person is corrupt, and then most of the times we've seen cases where government comes to say we've recovered this, we've recovered some material, some properties, from monies from proceeds of corruption. Now how those proceeds get implemented, get used, it becomes an issue. Most of the times Nigerians do not really know what actually happens to such properties, such monies, and all of that. If you have to advise government or prosecuting authorities when it comes to anti-corruption, how should they go about this particular problem?
Well, the first person I would turn to will be the judges that make orders about the recovery of assets. They can make orders as to the recovery of assets and to the management of those assets. So that is one. Two, when an asset is seized, between the time an asset is seized and when judgment is held, it can take a long time. Look at the old Chelsea Hotel.
Exactly.
The assets was seized, but it's just dilapidating, it's just rotting there away. Meanwhile, the former chief of Army Defense Staff, General Bade, there was a seizure, there was a prosecution, and there was a recovery of the assets. And everyone knows what has happened to those assets. One was given to the Northeast Development Corporation, another was
Information
to Voice of Nigeria. So that is a very good and transparent way of telling Nigerians that if you steal money, we will recover your assets, and that whatever it is will be put into good use. So that's what I said about transparency of implementation. But you cannot blame anyone if an asset is seized, but yet to be adjudicated upon, in the sense that we know somebody stole, we caught him while stealing, and they seized his property, as if they seized 10 cars. They will seize those 10 cars. Nobody has the right to use it because the evidence in court. So they keep those 10 cars in the pound. But the case goes on for 5 years. Now you can imagine what happens to a car that sits on the ground and is not used for 5 years. So there has to be creative ways. It is either when you seize a property, right, and you establish the fact that it is proceeds of corruption, you dispose of them immediately. Or you quickly determine the case to know whether you need to return the assets back to the gentleman or woman, or you need to dispose of it. But if cases go on for 10 years, 5 years, 6 years on assets that are perishable, then you have a problem.
All right, thank you very much. So now, when this administration came and they came up on the board of the mantra of change in its various ramifications, and now anti-corruption was one of the key focal points of that administration. Now, 4 years gone down, we are now in another session of the government. Would you say that the fight against corruption has been driven by this administration before and now? Has it in any way impacted on the psyche of the average Nigerian about awareness of corruption and the effects a corrupt person or what they have to really go through enough to deter acts of corruption from going on in whatever level?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that more people are talking about corruption. The public is now talking about corruption, and there's a bit of a response. There are different efforts at joining. The president called for help from the international community concerning our efforts against corruption, and people are responding. So that is yes. You and I, you are having this discussion with me now because anti-corruption has become topical. And it is because this government has placed it on their own front burner. No, in the sense that we have not seen the real impact yet. We are still seeing some of the issues and the dust is created. Is it true that some of these new ministers have corruption cases? Such matters have to be cleared in the air. Have we seen a reduction in amounts of money being diverted in constituency projects in a manner to see more hospitals and more schools in those constituencies? The jury is not out. We have to dig deeper and investigate those things. So we have not seen the evidence yet. But for me, you know, the fact that you are uncovering more corrupt people may also indicate that there is more work being done on corruption, because it is possible that we don't even know that these people are stealing. It is possible for us to continue living and not know that anything is happening.
Thank you very much. Now, in the eye of the public, and then especially the international community, Nigeria is seen as fighting corruption. In fact, the president I think on the African level, was given a champion of anti-corruption. And then, do you think that position of Nigeria as one of the front burner, the country in the front burner of fighting corruption, yes, do you think it's apt?
Well, you give people prizes and accolades for two reasons. You either want them to do better, or you want to acknowledge for what they have done. I suspect and I want to believe that this one given to our president and our nation is to encourage us to do better.
All right. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
And finally, your last word to Nigerians on fight against corruption.
Well, it's a collective fight. It is a fight of the government, a fight of the public. I think we should be repulsive of corrupt practices. We should discourage it in every way we can. The public should rise up, first of all, to make sure they demand that perpetrators of corruption will not be given the kind of recognition. So I called on, our traditional chiefs, on our churches. The churches should preach about it more. Traditional rulers should not give people titles, especially when those people have issues. We should teach it in schools. And I believe that the National Orientation Agency and all other communications agencies of government should join the chorus, and live by example as well.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on this platform. My guest has been Adesina of Fagbenro, Byron, and we have been having an extraordinary session talking about the fight against corruption as we have it currently in Nigeria. You heard from him. The fight against corruption is not all about the government, it's about you, it's about me. We have to say no to corruption in every ramification. We have to shun all corrupt practices, and corrupt people who are seen to be corrupt or who have been proven to be corrupt should be resisted, should not be celebrated. And also he did make a point that government should develop a blind pursuit, a blind political will to the fight against corruption. That's Nigeria Today. Thank you very much for watching. We'll do this again, same time, same station. See you next time.